Hello everybody, this is Kiran and today we are going to learn about software scenarios and software test cases. So in the SDLC, writing test cases is one of the major phases and it takes a lot of time and it also needs a lot of understanding on how to actually write good test cases. So we'll quickly go and see and try to learn about what a test scenario is. So any testable entity is called test scenario. So we have to actually first extract scenarios out of the use cases, and then for each scenario we have to write test cases. So in this session we will focus on writing scenarios and cases. So we'll first understand the test case, what test case is, and also we'll understand how to write test cases. So let's begin. So here we go. If you can see on my screen, a test scenario is, let's say login is one scenario. So the entire scenario needs more test cases. So we have to write test cases for that login scenario. So that the test cases can be there is usually email address and password field in any login page. So you have to write email address, you have to write the valid password and click on submit button, and it should be landed to the dashboard page. So this is a happy test case flow wherein everything is going okay. You have to apply all permutation and combinations of different test data to try to break the system and also to try to see the different behavior of the system. So if you do a valid test case, a valid email address, but not any valid password, so in that case your system shouldn't allow it to log in. Also it should show a valid error message. So that is one test case again. The third test case can be about entering wrong email and right password. And fourth test case can be about entering both the details as wrong inputs, email address and password, and trying to log in. So you shouldn't be allowed to log in. That's the ideal case. Now, the fifth test case can be having no inputs, blank data, and then try to log in. In any login page there are many other links like forgot password. So you have to click on that and check where it is landing us to. And then there is another link to register also if somebody is not registered and has accidentally landed up to the login page. So you should also allow people to go to the registration page from the login page. So that is yet another test case. So for one scenario you can have multiple test cases, as many test cases as is needed to make sure that the system will never break. So that is test case. And test data is the entries which you are doing to do the testing is called test data. So scenario is any functionality that can be tested. Any testable entity is called scenario. Now we'll see test case sheet first, then we'll come back to the PPT. So for test cases sheet, I have a sample ready. So here is the test case sheet which we follow and which we use to write our test cases. It's not mandatory to use Excel sheets as your test case writing tool. You may also use different softwares like TestRail, and there is different plugins also available, like in Jira there is something called Zypher which can be used for writing test cases. But most of the tools and softwares will have similar columns which we are going to discuss today. Now, how do we write a test case? So imagine this is a normal backend panel, let's say your order management panel, and we are trying to write the test case for the entire panel. So it's up to you. You want to segregate your sheets based on the scenarios, or you want to take entire flow and divide them into modules and write. So there's no hard and fast rule of maintaining the test case sheet. It's up to the organization and your team how you want to do it. But you should clearly understand in your head that you have to know that you have to extract scenarios and write test cases for each scenario in detail, both negative and positive test cases, and write good test cases. So the entire test suite should be so useful and should be able to make your system bug free, and should also be in alignment with the requirements of the client. So that's how we do. So imagine this scenario where there is a panel for which you're writing the test cases. So let me tell you the column names first. Let's discuss each column name and then we'll see the examples of the test cases, right? Let's begin with test case ID. So remember this difference that you can either use this sheet or you may use different softwares where you can fill in these details to create your test suite. So let's say we are using this Excel sheet now. So there's test case ID. But if you're writing your test cases in any tool, then this ID will be an auto-generated number which will be unique. And this unique number is helpful in identifying and searching the test cases later on. So test case ID is a mandatory field and should be unique to all the other fields in the same column. Once it is mentioned, this module name is not a mandatory field. You may skip this part, but since I have not segregated the sheets on the basis of scenarios, I have chosen to write module names so that for each module I will be writing test cases. So here you can just maybe you can relate scenarios to module name right here, but they are not same thing. Scenarios, we can extract modules from scenarios and then write test cases. It's up to you how you want to manage. There's no hard and fast rule. Again, I'm saying, so scenario is any testable entity. You can further break it down into modules and then write test cases for each module, or you can directly write test cases for scenarios. Since here I have not created different sheets for scenarios, I am creating modules and then I'll be writing test cases. Okay, this is not an optional field, module name. Title is a mandatory. Sorry, module name is an optional field. Title is mandatory. So in the title, you have to mention a crisp information about the test case. Let's say if you're trying to put valid user ID and password and test it. So your test case title will be testing login button using valid test data. Okay. Now in the summary, you have to properly explain the test case. So maybe your test summary will be like, we are trying to test the login functionality of the page using correct user ID and correct password. That is the explanation of the crisp title which you have mentioned in the previous field. Now once you have properly explained the summary of the test case, there is another optional field which is preconditions. Now this it's up to you, you want to fill in or not, but then preconditions help the person who is reading the test case to understand it better. What is a precondition? So if you're trying to execute a test case, or if you're trying to run a test case which is written, you should have some setup ready for actually performing it. Let's say you're trying to log into a system. So you must have valid credentials, that valid user ID and valid password. So that is a precondition wherein you need to have valid user ID and valid password. Let's say a precondition for adding an item to the cart page. Now, the precondition is that item should be available. If the inventory is 0, you cannot add it to the cart. So precondition is any situation which you need to have to reach to that test case execution, beginning of the execution of that test case. So that is precondition, optional again. Now steps to reproduce, important field, you must fill it. What are the steps to reproduce? Any person who is reading the test case should be able to recreate that test case which you have written. So it can be, for the login scenario, it can be enter the URL. So you have to mention the website which you are testing. Then fill in this user ID in the user ID box. Fill in this password in the password. You may mention the test data here, or you can have a separate test data column. It's up to you. Then you have to click on the login button, and then you should be landing onto this particular URL, maybe the home page or something. So what you're doing here, you are mentioning the steps one by one, so that a person will be able to actually execute each step and perform the test cases. So yes, important column to be filled. There's very important column coming up, which is expected behavior and actual behavior. Now, what is expected of the system? So if you're logging in, you must be allowed to log in if you're putting in the right user ID and password. That is an expected situation. But if you're writing wrong user ID and still you're allowed to log in, that's a bug, isn't it? So the expected situation is to be able to log in only when you're putting in correct user ID and password. If you're putting in wrong user ID password, the expected behavior is should not allow to log in, or maybe there's some error message which you should mention here in the expected behavior. Now, what is actual? Actual results you can only get when you are executing those test cases. So till writing of the test cases, you can only fill in up till expected behavior. So if you're actually writing test cases, only writing part is going on, in the STLC test designing phase is going on, then you will be filling in your sheet up to here only. Anything which is on left of this column and this column also. So till here you'll be able to fill in the data. But if you're executing your test cases, only then you'll be actually getting the actual results. So the actual results will be, if you're logging in correctly, the actual result is landing onto the dashboard page. So let's say this is a login scenario, and the actual result is expected was should, let's say this is like the valid test case scenario, okay, should allow to log in. Okay, this is the expected. Allow to log in to home page. And what happened actually? You were actually allowed to log into the home page. So logged into home page. So this is same. So if this and this are same, this will be passed. So you have to write P and it will be green. But if you try to log in and you got cannot log in, then this test case is failing. In that case, since it is failing, you put in the correct user ID and password, still it's failing, you have to actually raise a bug associated with this test case because your test case failed. Okay, so that is about expected and actual behavior. What is expected of the system? What is actually happening in the system? If there is a minor deviation or in terms of the error messages, you may raise it to the concerned team, though the test case is not failing. If let's say the error message should be logged in successfully, but it is coming something else like welcome. So there's a difference. So you may raise it to the, though you're allowed to log in, but the difference is in the text. So that is a different test case altogether. What messages we are getting, right? So that message test case will fail, but this test case that it is allowing us to log in will pass. So you must have as many test cases as you want in terms to meet the client requirements. This is a test case sheet. Now testing status again is a passed or fail, whatever happens, or if you're not tested, then you can write not tested. Maybe the system is not ready, or you don't have enough hardware and software to test. So you can just mention not tested, so that the manager is aware that, okay, these test cases are yet to be tested. So these are all the important columns in a test case sheet. We can take any website, any software of our choice, and we can start writing scenarios and test cases. Okay. Let's go back to the PPT. So here it is importance of expected and actual results, which we were talking about, because you write the expected results first, and then when you execute, you write the actual, and then you mark the test cases as pass or fail. Now, types of test cases. So there are many types of test cases which exist. Web testing, if you're doing a test case writing for website, if you're testing a website, you'll have to have all these types of test cases. First is functionality testing. You're actually writing functional test cases. Functional test cases will be related to the business flow of the software. You must understand the working of the software, where it is navigating to, what logics are being applied. All the entire business flow of the software should be properly understood, and the functionality of the software should be tested in that suite. So functional testing or functionality test cases is one type of test case. Next is performance testing. Here you will write the test cases for the performance based scenarios, like the speed, scalability, volume, the behavior, the performance of the system. So for those test cases will come under performance test case sheet. There is usability testing. Usability is how is the software, how easy is the software for a person to use, end user to use. So you have to actually behave as an end user and use the software to write usability test cases. Like if a new person is visiting your website, is he able to actually land onto the correct pages? Is he able to navigate properly? Database testing is about backend testing. You write test cases related to your backend panels, and how do you test them using different queries, different backend softwares. So you have to mention and write test cases for testing your backend panels. There's another security or penetration testing test cases. So here you mention your security testing related test cases. The vulnerabilities which can attack your system, or which your system is prone to get affected with, you have to mention those test cases in the security testing. Moving forward, test case versus test scenario. So test scenario is any testable entity, and test case is you're actually writing them to test that particular scenario. Okay, we'll again see the difference in our notes. Just hang on for now. So all the differences are written here. Actually, test cases are derived from the test scenarios. Now let's see the notes section. So here I have written some notes. So what is a test case? A test case is a set of actions which you are performing by the intention of making sure that all the client requirements are met properly. So that is a test case. Now the benefits of effective test case. What happens when you write good test cases? So you actually guarantee that you are giving a good test coverage. What is a good test coverage? It means all the requirements are having test cases associated with them. You're actually testing the entire set of requirements. If there are 100 requirements, and if you're able to test all those 100 requirements, you are having 100% test coverage. So the ideal case scenarios is to have a 100% test coverage. Reduce maintenance and software support cost. So since you will be delivering a perfect software at the end, you'll have very less or no issues available in the production. You will have to have less maintenance costs involved. There will be less production issues. There will be less change requests from the clients. So in that case, you'll be able to save costing in the maintenance part. So that is the advantage of having a very good test suite with you. Now, your test cases should be reusable. That means if you have written a set of test cases for a particular piece of the code, so let's say you have written a set of test cases for the payment gateway, and it is testing a particular payment model, let's say Paytm. So your test cases should be so much efficient that if we are using the same set of test cases for a different payment model or payment gateway, it should be reusable. So you have covered so many permutations and combinations of the inputs which can be applied to one gateway, it can be so useful to others also. So it should be very reusable. Your particular suite should be reusable in similar kind of products or softwares. It should be reusable in all browsers. It should be reusable on all devices, and also in different application development. That is, if you're getting a different build, or if you're getting an enhancement or updation of the code, there also it should be reusable. So that is about having a reusable test suite. It confirms that the software is actually matching the exact client requirements. Always, this term is so repetitive, and it's so important. That's why. Improve quality of software and user experience. Of course, if it is a test suite which is able to find out all the issues in the system, it will have a perfect, or will have a very stable system, and the user experience will also be very good in that case. Now, test case versus test scenario. So test scenario, as I said, it refers to any functionality that can be tested, any testable entity, as I said. So scenarios are important because they verify complete functionality of the application. So they actually, they are focused on the business flows, different business areas and processes of the software. But the test case will be able to actually test end to end about that particular scenario. So basically it is extracted out of the test scenarios. Now, differences, if you try to quickly go through, is a test case is basically a set of actions which we are providing, and test scenario is any feature that can be tested. So test case is a set of action steps, and test scenario is that particular feature, if you understand it that way. So test case is beneficial in exhaustive testing, though exhaustive testing is not possible. But having a test suite, we are trying to find out maximum number of issues and make the system as perfect as possible. So basically in test cases, we are trying out all permutations and combinations of the data to test the particular piece of the code. And test scenario is basically, it's very agile, and it's basically focusing on the end-to-end functionality of the software, isn't it? Okay, so test case is like how to test, a particular thing, and test scenario is like what to test. So that question you can ask yourself if you want to know the difference. Now, of course, test cases needs more time and effort to test, and test scenarios you can extract in lesser amount of time, because test scenarios will be lesser in numbers and will be lesser complex also than the test cases. Now, test cases has these information like test steps, expected results, actual results, which you saw in the sheet which we were discussing today. And test scenario will include the functionalities which you need to test. So only the mentioning of those functionality, their title, and maybe probably the explanation of those functionalities. So that is the test scenario sheet. So today we discussed about test scenarios, test cases. We saw the difference between test scenario and test case. We also saw how to write a test case. We saw the test case sheet and all the columns which are mandatory and optional in that sheet. And we took a sample example, and we understood how to write it, and passed and failed, how to pass and fail a test case. And if the test cases are failing, we have to mark a bug associated with that. So that's all for today. In the next session, we'll learn about requirement traceability matrix. Thank you.